Chazz Clevinger over at OneClickPolitics. Very excited for this conversation.
Very excited here.
Absolutely. Not sure where folks are joining in from, but a fireside in a lot of places would really hit home right about now. I'm in Austin, Texas. It is dark, dreary outside. I think the same is true in the Pacific Northwest. Phil, is that right?
Yeah, we're here in Seattle. We had, living up to our reputation, we had 4 inches of rain in the last 2 days and 65-mile-an-hour winds for about 36 hours. It's been a brutal couple of days here in the Pacific Northwest.
Wow. Chazz, what's going on in DC?
Well, we got some sunny weather today, but it's cool and cold outside. So, just when you look outside and say, oh, it's great, then you step out and you're like, oh, okay, it's got that cold winter nip that always comes back too early in DC, but it's hard to tell whether that cold nip is really the weather or if it's just the after effects of the big infrastructure bill. I'm not sure which one.
Chazz, the way you went into that, it seems like if this doesn't work out for you, you could go into being a weatherman on the radio or TV. You got a good radio voice.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm trying to follow in the steps to great Ron Burgundy, but
awesome. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to be your moderator as we get going. My name is Fars. I manage go-to-market activities over at prompt.io, which is a peer-to-peer texting platform. I have a series of questions that I've prearranged with Phil and Chazz. Main topic of discussion here is 2022 and what to expect on the advocacy front. We're going to go through 3 core topics. The first is going to be the top 5 tips for advocacy messaging. The second is going to be how to mobilize your constituents. And the third is going to be planning for 2022. 2022 is obviously a very, very big year given the midterms, and every midterm is bigger than the one before it. So we're really excited to see what folks are going to be doing and the conversations we're going to be having here. So on that note, we can go ahead and kick things off. And I'm going to start by asking a series of questions. Phil, I'm going to kick it off with you first and foremost. Why don't we start with your background, your bio? I see a lot of poker stuff in the background there. Would love to know more about what's going on.
Yeah, so I'm Phil Gordon. I am the CEO and founder of prompt.io. Company is 7 years old. We focus on text messaging for political advocacy and nonprofit organizations. Before Prompt, I was a professional poker player. I won 2 World Poker Tour tournaments. I hosted a bunch of the TV shows that made poker popular 15 plus years ago, including Bravo's Celebrity Poker Showdown, which is probably one I'm most famous for. I was ESPN poker analyst for a while, shows on ABC and Fox Sports and I don't know, whatever. Wrote a couple of books on poker. And I don't play much anymore. As my kids like to remind me, I am formerly famous. Now I am doing software. I am a computer scientist by training. Wrote a lot of the code for this stuff that our platform runs on until our developers locked me out of the code base a few years ago, which was maybe one of the worst days of my life. But I'm pleased to be here and great to meet Chazz and hear all about the great things that he's doing at OneClickPolitics.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And that's a little bit of a segue from that. When it comes to prompt.io, maybe you can give us a little bit of the elevator pitch of what it is and what led you from poker to political and advocacy tech.
Yeah, so we are a peer-to-peer and A2P texting platform. As I said, primarily focused on political advocacy and nonprofit. We are nonpartisan. Can't go into a lot of details about all the customers that we serve, but we serve customers up and down the ballot, everywhere from presidential all the way down to a dog catcher. On the nonprofit side, we work with some great organizations: American Cancer Society, United Nations High Commission for Refugees. We're helping them with their advocacy work. It's a great texting platform for, helping raise money, getting out the vote, the typical things that these types of organizations need to rally support around. We've been in this business now for quite a long time. We really enjoy helping those customers get great results and drive meaningful impact for their organization.
Nice. And this is a question I'm going to pose to both of you. I'll keep going in this trend with Phil before switching over to you, Chazz. But Phil, I'm curious to hear what your take has been on the impact of texting for advocacy-based organizations.
Yeah, well, I think one of the great success stories that we've had is with that United Nations High Commission for Refugees. This is a Nobel Prize winning organization that was having, some serious challenges getting people to open their emails. This is probably a common, a common problem, but when they lit up text messaging on the prompt.io platform, immediately they started seeing amazing results, and now text-based fundraising outstrips any other form that they do. Their email stuff is not nearly as effective, even on a cost-adjusted basis. It costs a lot more to send a text than it does to send an email, but even on a cost-adjusted basis, it's still the most effective solution that they have. So we're really proud of the work that we're doing for them. We also work with some of the major unions for their advocacy-based efforts and getting great results for them as well.
Awesome. Chazz, we're going to mix things up a little bit. Chazz, why don't you go ahead and let us know, fill us in on who you are, your background, and tell us a little bit about OneClickPolitics.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Chazz Clevinger, the CEO of OneClickPolitics. We're a digital advocacy software company. Our goal is to be able to help organizations empower their digital advocacy efforts by enabling them to connect their supporters with elected officials at the local, state, federal, even the international level. Phil mentioned some of your work with the American Cancer Society. We work with the Canadian Cancer Society. So we definitely got cancer covered on this call today. But back to OneClickPolitics, our goal is very simple. It's to help organizations be able to impact public policy outcomes. Now, the main mechanism for doing that is direct lobbying. And we all know what lobbying is, good and bad. Most of us have seen Casino Jack and see how lobbying can get out of control. But lobbying, for hundreds of years has always been the principal way which to move legislation. With the advent of technology now, we can help impact lobbying and work closely with lobbyists to help them be able to move the needle by driving constituent-based communication. And really, it's that constituent-based communication that makes it impactful, because lawmakers wanting to appease their constituents and get reelected are looking to make sure that their votes and their actions are in coordination, with the general sentiments of the people that live in their district. And our ability to find people that live in a member of Congress or a lawmaker's district, leverage them to take action, send an email, make a phone call to their lawmaker, that helps empower the lobbyists of the world to go into those meetings and be able to say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Member of Congress, I have 300-400 people in your district that have written in about XYZ issue. And so our tool is powerful in helping organizations be able to ultimately provide that air support, if you will, to direct lobbying teams in a meaningful way. But texting is to quickly piggyback on what Phil has said, highly critical to not only advocacy and fundraising operations, but political operations. And that's so true what Phil said about the ROI of texting. It's more costly up front, which prohibits some groups from jumping into it. But when you look at the S curve of its long-term effectiveness in terms of fundraising, always nets out in a very positive way.
Nice. You mentioned communications there, and there's two components to it that came top of mind for me. One is messaging, which is part of the pillars that we're supposed to be discussing here, and the other one is identifying the appropriate cohort to engage with via email versus text versus so on and so forth. I guess first, Phil, I'll ask you, when it comes to things like messaging, is there any tips and tricks around that? And I'll pose the same question to you as well after Phil.
Yeah, I think, segmentation is always super critical. You need to target the right message to the right person. It's a difficult proposition to get right, but when you do get it right, you'll see noticeable impacts on the return on investment. I think one of the key things to understand is that when you open a texting channel, it's a very personal channel, right? It's one of those things that, my mobile phone's my mobile phone, and I want to really engage, right? It's not good enough, I don't think, in today's world to send a text and then ignore replies. I think that bi-directional engagement, if people have questions about what you're texting them about, or they want to engage in a real substantive conversation, I think that's really important for moving the needle forward for the organization. I see some organizations make the mistake of, spray and pray, where they send out these basic, these notifications that aren't personalized, that aren't tailored to the specific audience, and then they ignore the inbound, questions that result. And those organizations don't get nearly the bang for the buck that for those that take the time to personalize each outbound text using field merge. Like, you're not going to do that in a manual way, right? You'll use field merge capabilities to do that, right? But using someone's first name to introduce the text has shown in our stats, like we've run queries against all the messages that have been field merged just using first name, as opposed to those that go out generically. And there's a remarkable increase in engagement for those that have just utilized that simple field merge. So just a couple of things that we've seen here. I'm curious what Chazz thinks as well.
Great. As far as I believe your question was kind of tips and tricks and general ways that texting can be used, correct?
Yeah, so it was more around the messaging of it. So for example, if you're trying to get a advocacy campaign up and running, getting your supporters to actually take action, are there general messaging techniques that you would recommend folks use that you've seen to be effective?
Well, definitely. I mean, depending on whether it is a fundraising or an advocacy related campaign, I'll stick to advocacy since that's my main work. Certainly, using people's names, and being brief. I can't overstate the importance of brevity, and then also being timely. With your texts. If you have a news story, like right now,
Yeah.
Want to send somebody a text about the infrastructure bill, right now is the time, not a week or 2 weeks or a month, from now. The organizations that I've worked with that have been the most effective, for instance, are the ones that capitalize on what's going on in the 24-hour news cycle that is immediately relevant, to people. If I'm getting a text, that's generic in nature, that says like, like, hey, Chazz, you're a bad person. We're kicking you off the list if you don't give $25 to XYZ presidential candidate. And I won't, name names, but I've seen some very very thoughtless, very, flat out stupid texts that have been sent to me from, some otherwise very, highly, regarded campaigns. And, I've scratched my head and I've thought, okay, well, this must be working with a particular audience, so they wouldn't be doing it, but it's certainly not working for me. But sticking to, to my sweet spot, which is advocacy, what people tend to react to the most and where we get the most benefit, is by combining, those texts, with relevant, news that they can relate to. If they saw something on Fox or CNN, MSNBC, about a specific issue, and, we can tie it to that, or we can tie it to some other cultural news that's going on, the pandemic, the COVID issue with Aaron Rodgers that consumed the news cycle, last week, if we can relate that, to an advocacy issue. So for instance, last week I had, several health organizations that, use our advocacy software platform, and, they built their campaigns around, the issue with, Aaron Rodgers, and used, some quick snippets about that, to lead into how that's relevant about, why we all need to be thinking about, health issues related to, to the pandemic. And so that would be my first and foremost statement I would make in terms of, how to leverage messaging for texting.
So it's essentially.
Sorry, Fars. One of the cool things about texting is that, with very few exceptions, the texts that are delivered are read within 3 minutes of receipt. Like something absurd, like 90% of texts that are sent are read within 3 minutes of delivery. And there is no other medium that you can come up with that gets that sort of instantaneous engagement. And so, like Chazz said, when one of these instantaneous news stories hits, right, the format of a text is 160 characters, right? You can do more than that, right? But in a very small compressed space, 160, 320 characters, you can compose that quick little hit the send button, and immediately you'll know within a few minutes that message is getting through and being read by tens of thousands of your concerned constituents. And there's nothing else that you can do. If you send an email, that email, if you're lucky, might get 10 or 15% read rate, right? But it's not going to get 10 or 15% read rate in 3 minutes. That's 10% or 15% if you're lucky over the course of several weeks as people churn through their, infinitely stuffed inbox of email, right? So the texting stuff really works for that instantaneous quick hit. And it's really the only thing that I can think of, or that I've experienced, that gets that instantaneous result.
That's so important, because in the political and in the public affairs advocacy world, I'm operating, with very little notice most of the time.
Yep.
My clients call me up, they need something done yesterday.
Yep.
And in this world, if you can't do things yesterday, you're irrelevant. And,
Yep.
You won't be able to, hit the mark that, you need to achieve success. And that to me is, where texting, even though it may come with an initial premium, is worth its weight in gold to be implemented as part of advocacy and fundraising and political efforts. Because, if you need to raise money now for an ad buy you're doing next week, or you need to get people to send letters to their lawmakers to vote, to get their lawmakers to try to vote yes or no on a bill that's coming up in 2 days, then you're going to get much better response more quickly on those things than will an email. Because an email, not only do you have that low read rates, and even if you're getting a higher read rate than that, you're still having to go through, do remarketing initiatives, and develop various engagement and nurturing emails. You're having to perform audience segmentation, and a highly efficient way, try to leverage third-party data, to enhance, your email set so you can know your messaging to the right audience. And it's a lot of work. Email campaigns can be effective, but it's so much more work. And if you're willing to couple in texting, you can get a lot more done more quickly.
It's just a different kind of medium, right? I mean, email, if you're going to send an email about Aaron Rodgers, it has to be thoughtfully, it's going to be 3 or 4 paragraphs of text. They're going to have a photo, right? I mean, there are going to be links and like all the stuff that you kind of takes time to put together and get to look right, and and field merged and all that sort of stuff. With a text, because it's a limited format, right? And most typical texts in this realm are less than 320 characters. It's kind of like a tweet. Like, the composition and approval and bulletproofing of that message is way simpler than it is if you're trying to, compose the, a tome, to get out in an email. So also MMS can be very effective as well. MMS is the sending of photos and, video. And again, it's super simple to make that happen by a text message. And those that are using it, you can send about a 15, 20-second video today. It's mostly limited to that length. It has to be under 500 kilobytes in order to get through the carriers. But you can do some compression, and you can send those short length videos and get some great results. And MMS photos are a great method for communicating as well. So
So
it's just,
let's,
yeah,
yep,
it's just a great medium.
yep. So let's actually transition that a little bit into the concept of Omni Channel. So obviously text is one way to get messages read, but it's definitely not
Yeah.
the only way. And we would certainly advocate in any instance where an advocacy-based organization wants to engage in texting, they should also be engaging in email, they should be engaging in phone, they should be engaging in advertising, kind of the entire gamut of channel approach to getting a message heard. So I'm kind of curious, Chazz, since I know OneClickPolitics does a lot of that stuff, like you kind of bundle it all into one amazing package. Do you have guidance in terms of when to use omni-channel, how to segment which cohort gets the text versus the email versus whatever else? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question, Fars, because, any campaign or advocacy group that is not pursuing omni-channel strategies in terms of their outreach is really missing out on the ability to be able to increase their effectiveness. I like to use analogies. So it's like going to war. You wouldn't go to war with, just a handful of rifles. You'd have some tanks, you'd have some mortars, you'd have an army, you'd have a navy, so you need all these different tools to achieve your end purpose, right? Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get as far or accomplish as much. Maybe you win with just your army, but you'll win quicker if you have the army and the navy, to work with. And so with advocacy or political campaigns, the more channels you have to be able to reach your intended audience, the more effective you're ultimately going to be. And corporate marketing strategists have known this, for years. Tamil and I were talking about this, a couple of weeks ago at the American Association of Political Consultants Conference about just how important it is, and it has been for years, for corporate marketing professionals to be able to to penetrate audiences from multiple different avenues. But specifically sticking to omni-channel for advocacy and for politics, email has been and continues to be king. And so learning how to leverage email in a way that can be effective is the real trick, to building, a proper foundation, which then allows the rest of your omni-channel communications to be more effective. Email, is, kind of, like the old minivan, gets you from point A to point B. Every family has one. My brother just bought a new Honda Odyssey for his 3 kids and wife. It's the old staple, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. But with email, you have to do a lot of those things that I mentioned earlier to make sure it's effective. You have to conduct list hygiene. You have to perform data enhancements and use third-party services like i360 or L2 or other data sources to ensure that you are maintaining a list with maximum metrics on all of the people in your database. But beyond email, you're really missing out if you're not using texting to communicate with your audience as well, because now you have 2 channels, 2 very different channels in my opinion, for being able to reach people. And you have 2 touch points instead of 1. In terms of communicating with like lawmakers in my line of work for advocacy campaigns, although email is the most widely used mechanism, it can also be, one of the least effective if not done correctly. Lawmakers complain all the time to me, Chazz, we hate form messages. We hate getting the same message over and over again from people because it's just like a bunch of zombies clicking a button and we don't know if they really care about the issue or not. And so like with our platform, for instance, one of the things we focus on the most with our customers is how do we bifurcate audiences to create different segments of lawmakers, Republicans versus Democrats, sponsors or co-sponsors, of bills. How do we then, continue to break down the audience of advocates as well? In a political campaign, anybody that's old like me that used to do direct, mail all the time, as one of their primary mechanisms of outreach knows you never just send one homogenous mail piece to everyone. You break it down, you send one mail piece to the teachers, one to, the religious folks, another email or another direct mail piece to the veterans, and you break them down by these different coalition groups, if you will, in order to maximize your messaging effectiveness. And you have to do the same with email and, ideally with texting too, because the more granular you're able to be within reason, because it can become a lot of work, the more effective your conversion rates are ultimately going to be. Other channels for outreach that are very effective, that are harder to get people to do, but are more effective are, phone calls and videos. Lawmakers always tell me, how much they love that, because with a phone call, they're hearing from the live voice of their constituent, or a video, they're hearing the raw, unfiltered version of what that person has to say in video format, which is more trustworthy to them than something like an email. But being able to use all your tools effectively to achieve that end goal is really, I think the crux of, using omni-channel communications effectively, regardless of what your goal is.
Chazz, I have heard before of folks really getting good results with faxing, because apparently that's the way that most of the folks on the Hill actually do get work done amongst each other. So if you blow up a fax line and work can't be done, you have no choice but to pay. Is that true? Is this like a real thing?
So faxing,
Really?
yeah, it's true. It's a mixed
Wow.
bag. I say true with caveat, because some offices will tell you that they hate faxing, and that they don't want you to send faxes, and they'll complain, and they'll tell the special interest groups I represent not to do it anymore. But when they do that, we know we have their attention. Now, it's a fine line, because we don't want to upset lawmakers' offices to the point where they're not listening to us anymore. But if they have our attention, I'm not really concerned if we're miffing their staff slightly, because at least we're standing out, and
Right.
at least we're getting their attention. But it is true that most congressional offices do still have a fax machine. Most state legislative offices still have a fax machine, and it's still a very effective mechanism to be able to get a hold of people. And that's one of the reasons why we still use it. We're in fact one of the only advocacy software platforms that do still use faxing. We use it in a somewhat unique way, though, in that we actually have fax built in as an automatic backup to email. So if for whatever reason, an email delivery, is taking too long to get to a lawmaker, or they change their email address, after a special election, then a fax will automatically be triggered to that office, in addition to, or as a backup, to that, that email. And so we have faxing implemented as an automatic tool that goes along with every email we send in the one-click platform for that reason, because of the fact that even though it's old school, it still gets attention. I like to compare it to direct mail. A lot of people say that direct mail is dead, and that it's not as effective as it used to be. And I think the reality is it's nowhere near being dead. It's just that digital is taking up more budget, and digital is a lot more important than it was 10 years ago. So the mail budgets are going down and the digital budgets are going up, but mail is still effective in campaigns. And I would, say that it's the same way for faxes to lawmakers, in that, you're not going to get any brownie points for innovation, but you are going to get their attention. And it's part of a good omni-channel strategy is, you want to make sure that you're doing a Hill Day and your advocates are going to meet with lawmakers. You're doing emails, you're doing faxes, you're doing patch through phone calls, you're doing, videos, you're sending your contract lobbyists armed with their fact sheets and economic impact data. All these things together provide the tools to, to build an appropriate advocacy house, if you will. But, just doing a hodgepodge of those things are what land organizations in trouble. And then they come calling me in a moment of crisis, asking me how they can pack a year's worth of government relations work into a couple of weeks to be effective. And of course, I help them out. That's why I'm in business. But, it's not effective for them, because then they end up having to pay a lot more because they didn't plan ahead when they could have saved a lot of money.
That's really interesting. So in terms of omni-channel, you have text, email, fax, phone, ads, direct mail. And actually, Chazz, another thing I heard about direct mail that's kind of actually incredibly interesting is that apparently 90 or 80% of Americans signed up for informed delivery with the U.S. Postal Service, which for those on the call is when they take a picture of what your mail is supposed to be and then send you an email so you know what to expect in the mail. And now part of campaigning advocacy tactics involves direct mail as part of the email program. so that you know that 80% of your or 90% of your list is signed up for informed delivery, and 80% of them are actually opening those emails. So now you're hitting them twice. You're actually delivering the physical piece, and you're hitting their eyeballs when they actually open the email as well, which is a very, very interesting use case. So lots of different channels to actually approach that. Phil, I'm curious going into what the landscape you think is going to look like for organizations in 2022. We hear a lot of talk around concept around 10DLC. Maybe you can explain what that is, what it means for organizations, what they should be prepared for, and any other trends that you might see on the horizon.
Yeah, well, I want to also just be clear, like text is one strategy. It's one tactic that you can use to move your organization forward. It's not the only one, right? You're still going to do the email, like Chazz said, like you're still going to do all the things. And I have an expression, when you're trying to solve a complex problem, and you need to try, you need to think of everything that might work, and then instead of picking one, you got to do them all. And that's certainly the case here. Texting is one of the things that the organization needs to do. For 10DLC, this has been an interesting year. The carriers got together and made it so that organizations can register themselves so that the carriers know who is sending these texts. So in the past, a lot of text messages for political or otherwise, if you started sending these in bulk, you'd see quite a bit of carrier filtering and undelivered texts. But what's happened is, because of this registration regime that they've put in place called 10DLC, suddenly now they know who's sending the texts, and they've been vetted and they've been verified, and the texts are getting through. We just came through, an election here a couple of weeks ago in early November. And, for the customers of ours that were sending registered text via, compliant 10DLC up and down the ballot, they're seeing 95% plus delivery rates, in some cases even higher. For the unregistered text, there's still some delivery issues. So this has been a very difficult thing for the industry to navigate, but we have embraced it fully. We are a partner with the various entities that are in place. I believe that we were the very first organization to facilitate sending fully registered political texts, because we've been really out ahead of it. So this is a great thing for organizations, and the throughput is really amazing as well. For this political class and advocacy class of texting, they're allowing now short code type throughput via 10-digit long code. So you can take a standard 202 or 206 in our area code. You can take one of those standard phone numbers and you can actually use it at throughputs that meet or exceed short code throughput for the very first time. It's a great thing for the industry at large. There's been a lot of pain associated with it. I'm not making fun of that for sure. But for the organizations that fully embrace compliant texting on 10DLC, they're going to get great results.
So that's essentially, the regulations coming out, it could cause a little bit of heartburn, but it also has potentially a lot of upside for organizations, right?
Massive upside.
Okay, awesome. Is there anything else that you're seeing on the horizon worth calling out on at least the texting front? And I'm going to pose the same question to you, Chazz, on the advocacy front.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that will happen as a result of this 10DLC is that SMS will become a more trusted source, right? When as a consumer, and this is going to take some time, right? But if as a consumer that organizations have been vetted and approved to send texts, then suddenly you can trust that the texts that are coming are legitimate, right? Everyone knows that you're going to get, you get text messages every once in a while from people that are fishing around for PII to try to hack your accounts and stuff like that. Most of that stuff should go away as this 10DLC registry process is fully implemented. It's going to take another year or so for that to happen, but I firmly expect that trust in the texting ecosystem will increase remarkably over the course of the next few years. And heading into 2024, I know it's a long time away, but whatever, everyone's already thinking about it, right? Heading into 2024, when you get a text in 2024, you'll know for sure, and I think there will be tools available for you to positively identify with absolute certainty the origination organization of that text message if you so wish.
Nice. A lot more transparency in the space coming, sounds like.
Yeah.
Chazz, slightly more generalized question to you is things you're seeing, trends upcoming in at least up to 2022, just on the advocacy front in general.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, there's certainly, going to continue to be innovations, but I think one of the healthy tensions that exists that is really going to drive those changes are the tensions that exist naturally between, lawmakers and special interest groups, with technology being in the middle. So Congress, for instance, they have their own platforms that they purchase, constituent management systems, if you will, to help them monitor incoming communications from the general public. Some of those popular platforms are, IQ, Fireside 21, iConstituent. There's a whole hodgepodge of, private, software platforms that sell their services to lawmakers. IndiGov is another popular one. And I saw all of them at NCSL a couple of weeks ago down in, Tampa. And these platforms exist, as I mentioned, for the purposes of, legislative correspondence and other staffers to be able to screen incoming constituent emails that are being driven from advocacy platforms like OneClickPolitics. So OneClickPolitics and all of our competitors who are in that space, enabling these third-party special interest groups to drive communications from constituents to elected officials. All of our messages are coming through those platforms or aggregation systems, if you will. And the staffer on the other end of it is looking to see which messages are from constituents, non-constituents, et cetera. And so as those platforms become more effective in screening communications, one of the big challenges, for companies like mine is, well, how do we continue to make emails relevant? How can we continue to create, more variance and authenticity in the communications that are coming from individual constituents without necessarily placing the burden on them to write those communications? Because that is the ultimate paradox that, almost every advocacy, manager that I talk to deals with is, they say, well, Chazz, we would love it if every one of our advocates wrote their own message, but that's not a reality. 10% of our people take the time to write their own message, which means that 90% of communications that are being sent are the pre-written messages that we're writing. So how do we achieve that variance? And so we have to use tools like our message rotator or our smart targeting feature that break down those audiences and, create a wider variety of potential content that can be sent to lawmakers. So the average campaign in OneClickPolitics now, has maybe 50 to 100 different messages that are rotating through in them that can be sent to lawmakers rather than just kind of a standard pre-written message. And the purpose of that feature is to try to create, a greater variety of content that's being sent to lawmakers, to make it seem as though that there, are more individualized communications that are being created. And so it's really that challenge that is probably one of the number one issues that I see, arising that companies like mine are working on to try to create, more opportunities for the special interest groups we represent to be more effective in their messaging, to Congress. That's one area. Another area of innovation that I see is, being able to understand, your audiences better by bringing in, third-party data. Like currently we, have several integrations with, leading, data companies. And, the really main issue right now is just pricing, because those data companies, charge a lot, for their individual records. But, what we're working on right now is the capability to be able to leverage those data sets, at a lower cost, through those companies by committing a certain amount of volume to enable our customers to be able to do either no cost or low cost data enhancements, to their advocate universe, which for my clients is the equivalent of their voter file, to be able to understand their audiences better, because ultimately, data, and the ability to leverage data effectively to drive better advocacy communications are where, the industry as a whole is going. The days of, just getting, John Smith and Susie Q, to send a forum message to Congress, that was, 1999 when CapWiz came out and the early part of the 2000s, when, that was still an effective way of, digital communication to Congress. Nowadays, if you're using just simple, tools to send forum messages, you're not getting taken seriously. The average member of Congress gets over 10,000 emails a day now. That metric is up from, about 400 emails, a day in 2001. So in the last 20 years, we've gone from the average member of Congress getting a couple hundred communications a day, from different special interest groups that were driving digital communications through early tools like CapWiz or Voter Voice to, now, over 10,000, messages a day are coming from these various special interest groups who are using advocacy tools like OneClickPolitics. That means that the capacity of legislative offices to field those communications, they've had to leverage tech tools like the ones that I mentioned to be able to screen all those messages, because there's no way you can read 10,000 emails a day from constituents. And so they have to make assumptions about, okay, well, which messages matter the most? And easy ways to make those assumptions are by, okay, which messages are unique versus which messages are just repeat form messages, which messages are from our constituents versus non-constituents. We have to put ourselves in the mindset of staffers and lawmakers and think about what is relevant to them, because we're losing if we are not relevant to lawmakers. Because even though my customers, the people who pay me, are big companies, big trade groups, big nonprofits, unless I'm thinking 24/7 about how those communications are being viewed by 24-year-old legislative correspondents or 32-year-old chief of staff, or by a member of Congress, then we're losing, because in order to maintain relevance, we have to continually be innovating and thinking about how they're viewing those communications.
There's so much in there that's incredibly fascinating, going into the fact that it's kind of like the marriage of the psychology of what you expect is going to have an impact compared to the tech and implementation side of it. The fact that you have so many different variants running simultaneously just to be able to get in the door of a legislator's inbox is actually incredible. I'm curious to know, Chazz, do you have a sense, or do you have a generalized principle around the concept around grassroots advocacy versus grass tops, what you see to be effective between the two variants? And maybe you could explain to folks what the distinction is between grassroots and grass tops, and maybe describe what your experience has been.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we work with a company called a RAP Index that helps in cases where we need to be able to help organizations build what are referred to as key contact programs, which is generally what people mean in the grass top sense when they're thinking about advocacy campaigns, but in a very simple way to describe the difference between grassroots and grass tops. Grassroots is, John Smith that lives on 502 Mulberry Lane and, is just a common, everyday, average citizen who happens to care about the infrastructure bill or about, COVID-19 relief or whatever issue you're advocating on. But John Smith does not care about the greater cause. John Smith does not want to give money. John Smith does not want to come to your conference. John Smith just wants to click a button on an email because he cares about your issue, but that's where it typically stops, for, the grassroots. And I mean, of course, there are multiple layers of this. There are advocates, super advocates, champions, and other vernacular that organizations use for their best digital advocates. And that isn't to say that there aren't grassroots advocates that are highly committed, dedicated, and will give you money online or will be super active. There are many of those, but we're just talking about the standard grassroots advocate, the run-of-the-mill advocate, not your super advocate or your champion, That's just, the regular individual person who is, blends in with the other 10,000 or 100,000 or hundreds of thousands of people that you have an email address for in your system. So if you're a top tier advocacy organization, that has an email list of several 100,000 people, then your standard run of the mill grassroots advocate is just another email address on that list of somebody who is just a regular person that might send an email to their lawmaker if you ask them to. A grass tops individual is, someone who, is potentially has a personal, professional, or political relationship to a lawmaker, which is referred to as a key contact. They may be a journalist or somebody who worked in a lawmaker's campaign. They may be a campaign donor. They may be a community college president or the owner of a business that employs 100 people in that lawmaker's district. Grass Tops is typically focused on how do we leverage highly influential people, referred to as influencers, to try to get them, to then, be formal or informal advocates to lawmakers on issues. A lot of money is being made right now by, companies that peddle influencer data. Some of those are Unearthed, Apple Cart, KnowWho. And, I've used all of these companies before in the past to leverage influencer data to help me, reach the people that they claim to be the ones who can influence lawmakers, the most. So for instance, had numerous collaborations with Unearthed who have helped me to reach, the top 700 or 800 people around a lawmaker, whether it's, their wife's yoga instructor, their pastor, their next door neighbor, and all the people that live, in their, gated community, people that serve with them on corporate boards, people that went to college or law school with them, being able to get messages in front of those people, whether it's with targeted digital ads, or whether it's, just continually peppering them with content, to, make them, aware, of your issue is a really critical part, of achieving success with Grass Tops, because Grass Tops is all about how do I influence the 5 most important people in the room. Grassroots is about, how do I get a stadium of people, to react and clap and applaud, for me. And so, grassroots is the macro, Grass Tops is the micro. Both are really critical. And if you want to have a successful advocacy operation, you're going to focus on both. But Grass Tops is about who are the 50 or 100 people I have out of hundreds of thousands that really really and truly carry weight and carry real political influence versus, who are just the normal people that will click on an email and take an action. And so understanding those two and planning for those two and budgeting for those two, different elements of an advocacy program are really critical to its success.
Nice. And we're getting to close to the top of the hour. I just want to note that if anybody has questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A or the chat box here on Zoom. But we'll carry on. And actually, I have one more thing for you, Chazz, which is the distinction between OneClickPolitics that I've noticed in the other vendors in the space, and that is your acquisition efforts. Can you maybe talk about what makes that distinct and unique? I mean, what it is for first and foremost, and also what makes it distinct?
Sure, absolutely. So, having been in kind of the advocacy space as a practitioner for a long time before starting OneClickPolitics, one of the things that was always important to me when I worked in-house for companies running grassroots programs, or when I was at agencies like when I had my own shingle, or when I was working at 720 Strategies, being able to reach a wide audience beyond just my organic advocate list. Because if I'm a new organization or I'm an existing organization with a small list, maybe I have a couple thousand people on an email list, nobody's going to take me seriously with that. I won't mention the name of a company, but one of my clients went public this year and became the first publicly traded company in the United States in their industry. When I first started working with them, they had a list of 250 people. And, I tried not to laugh when I was talking to them, because I'm like, you'll never influence Congress. You won't even influence your local county commissioner with 250 people, like on an email list. We have to grow that. You have to grow that if you want to have any impact. Otherwise, you you shouldn't even be spending any money on my tools or anything else until you've actually built your audience. And so one of the things that we do is we have our own database in-house that we've mined and that, we've acquired like over the years. That we've opted in to receive communications, from us. And, we have 89 different, data points that we maintain on those individuals based on policy issues they've identified as being important to them, such as, consumer freedom, cannabis, education, infrastructure, et cetera. And so we can do direct outreach to those individuals. We also have several like exclusive partnerships, with web publishers that allow us to post their content, on various web properties, that expands our audience, very significantly, beyond the millions of people that we have in our own database. But essentially through that network, we're able to guarantee that we can get a certain number of people to sign your petition or send an email to their lawmaker, and that these people will be constituents of the lawmaker you want to influence. They will fit the geographic and demographic profile that you have in mind. So if you're trying to specifically drive actions, from Democrats, versus Republicans, or men versus women, or 18-year-olds versus 65-year-olds, then we can help you reach that correct demographic for constituent, based action to lawmakers. We can guarantee that we'll get these actions driven within a specific time period. Usually if people are calling me, it's because they're in crisis. They got a bill that they need to kill within the next 2 weeks. And, they need me to help them get as many emails or phone calls to lawmakers as possible. And so this particular service, even though it's mostly used in crisis, I would say the better way to utilize it is proactively, to grow your audience over time, strategically and thoughtfully, so that you're not having to call me and, pay me 5 times what you would have had to pay otherwise in crisis, to, just instead build it up over time. Most of my clients, wait until they're in crisis to call me to get a bunch of actions because, they have to bet the kitchen sink on the issue. And if they don't kill the bill, their whole organization is going to suffer for the next 10 years. And so they end up spending a lot of money, to get a lot of actions driven, quickly. And it becomes very transactional. And, that can be great because if your only goal, is to just get messages to lawmakers to kill a bill and you don't care how much you spend, that can be great if you're a big company that has a lot of money. But if you're a nonprofit and you need those people to be able to donate to you in the future, and you need to be able to count on them to add to your list of supporters for the future, quick transactional campaigns are not the way to do that. You want to build over time, so that you can, start predicting, and start, being able to, build a sustainable model where, okay, every time I'm running, a new ad campaign or an acquisition campaign, X percentage of those people, are going to stick with me and do secondary actions and, make donations or continue to remain involved in my network, whereas I know that, X percentage is going to drop off and isn't going to be, involved in the long term. Probably one of the most effective organizations that I've seen, do, email list acquisition on a consistent basis is Christians United for Israel. They built a network of over 10 million advocates, over the last 6-7 years, by pursuing, very effective acquisition strategies using a variety of different vendors. They've done it, by being very thoughtful and committed to that long-term process, versus, just waiting until crisis hits, and then calling up and saying like, well, we got to get this bill killed. Having that audience pre-built, ready to go, is definitely one of the reasons why I'd say personally why I believe customers like working with us is the fact that we bring some of that advertising and consulting expertise to the table beyond just a software subscription where we flip a button and say, good luck, Godspeed, and you'll hear from us come renewal time.
Yeah, there's like a piece of that I want to pull out and highlight the fact that if it isn't a crisis level thing where you just need to get someone up and running in a week or two, then you have the potential to actually nurture people from just advocates who take action to other parts of the ladder of engagement, potentially nurture them to donor or opt into text or some other means of communication. Like there's so much more that you can do with somebody when you do it the right way than when it's a last minute attempt. We're going to the last couple of minutes here, and I wanted to flip over to you, Phil, regarding some key takeaways that you want to leave folks with for who are engaged in advocacy work or part of advocacy groups.
Sure. I think key takeaway, speaking on my book, is texting is one strategy that should be pursued. I think personalize the message. I think take advantage of MMS. Don't ask for money with every single text. That's not going to be effective. Make sure that you're staffed appropriately so that you can have real substantive conversations with constituents. When they reply back, you really need to take the time to have a substantive conversation when possible. And take advantage of the registration regime under 10DLC, because you're going to get outstanding deliverability and great throughput and all kinds of great benefits from the 10DLC world.
Well said. Chazz, same question to you. Key takeaways for advocacy groups for 2022, sorry.
So key takeaways going into 2022?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bullet points I would say to focus on is number one, have a strategy, because if you don't have a plan going into 2022, you'll get swept with the currents. So know what your resources are, know what your capabilities are, and match your resources, to what you can actually achieve. If you've got a David budget, then focus on the few things you can do with that. If you got a Goliath budget, then, do everything, go Omni Channel, go full scale, but, don't build, the Lexus, strategy campaign, with, the Toyota budget. Make sure that, you have your resources, aligned, to your strategy, most importantly. And if your resources are aligned to your strategy, then, you can start thinking about, well, who do I want to influence? If you only have the budget to influence federal campaigns, then stick to that. You can always implement a state, program later when you have the money and resources to do so, and focus on either increasing your membership, to gain money that way, or if you're a nonprofit, on, doing better with fundraising. But that's probably the most critical thing that I would recommend, is that resource alignment, with your strategy to be effective.
Very well said. On that note, obviously we open the floor to any questions for Phil or Chazz. Their contact information is also listed here, so we definitely welcome conversations. Please don't hesitate to reach out. But yeah, we'll go ahead and leave the Zoom open for a few more minutes, and then we'll go ahead and shut it down. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Chazz, Tamila, and thank you to our attendees.
Thank you so much, Fars, for facilitating. Thanks to Tamila and my team for putting this together. And of course, thanks to Chazz for attending and lending his excellent insights into this really interesting world that we're living in. And 22 should be really, really fun, I think.
Yes, I echo that.
Awesome. Thanks all.
Thanks, Fars. And yeah, I'll stick around if anybody has questions.
Evidently, we did a good job of just educating everyone. No questions necessary.
Well, that's a first for me. Usually I just confuse everyone.
Yeah. All right, Fars, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we go ahead and stop that. Stop the recording.
Okay, cool.